Welcome to the smartest doctor in the room. I'm your host, Dr. Dean Mitchell. The best healthy diet has been the holy grail of modern medicine. Despite hundreds of studies and journals, there seems to be a lot of controversy as to which is the best diet for most of us to follow. Before there was paleo diet or keto diet, there was actually the zone diet. I remember it. Dr. Barry Sears, a PhD biochemist, who for 25 years has been espousing that to stay healthy, a diet with the proper proportion of proteins, fats, and yes, carbohydrates is the key to good health. Dr. Sears published the original The Zone Diet in 1995. He did have quite a lot of competition back then from some other famous doctors, such as Dean Ornish, who published his book, Reversing Heart Disease, which favored a low-fat vegetarian diet. And in contrast to that, there was Dr. Robert Atkins, who published the Atkins Revolution, which much of the public embraced as a high-fat diet, but no carbs. And in between all of that, most physicians were pretty supportive of the Mediterranean diet. And now, finally, what's recently hit the stage is the paleo diet and the keto diet. And it really kind of has us all scratching our heads. What should we eat? I don't know. People ask me this all the time. My guest today, Dr. Barry Sears, has just released his newest book, The Resolution Zone, where he makes the case that how you can use your diet to resolve inflammation, which, as we all know, is such an important thing. And he also we'll talk about also the blood markers and things that you can do to follow how you do on this diet. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Barry Sears to the podcast.
Dean, thank you very much.
My pleasure. All right, we're going to start with something very general about diet and weight. Because again, probably back in 1995, when you came out with your diet, the Zone diet, and as you know too, most diets that got a lot of popularity, they weren't so much interested back then about inflammation. They were more about losing weight. And your book, in fact, obviously the Zone book sold over 1 million copies, I think, back then, as the word started to spread that people were losing weight without going hungry on your diet. But I want to ask you now, do you think losing weight is one of the most key things in any diet?
No. Well, the key thing and where I started, actually, the start of the Zone was around the early 1980s when the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded for understanding how a group of hormones called eicosanoids basically affect inflammation. So the Zone diet was not a diet. It was really a way of controlling the levels of excess inflammation. Now, one of the consequences of that, if you can reduce inflammation, and more importantly, as we'll talk about today, resolve it, then you have the keys to living a longer and better life.
So it's not about weight. I mean, I know, look, what my point that I was bringing out is that, you know, most people, when they hear about, oh, the new diet's out, or the keto, or the paleo, I'm going to lose weight. But again, what you make a really good case in your book, and we're going to get into that's not the most important thing.
Not by a long shot.
I mean, most people, again, right, they're so happy about, they go on the scale and they see 5 or 10 pounds that they've lost, but yet their biochemical markers could be getting worse, right? Is that correct?
Exactly. And that's why when you look at the scale weight, we have to be we should be looking at the blood chemistry. The blood chemistry will tell you what is the best diet for you.
Right. And I think that's why you have such a unique position. You know, one of my other big idols in medicine really was Linus Pauling. And he was essentially a biochemist. He was a chemist, but he worked in a lot of biological, and discovered so many of those pathways and everything. But they, really understand, because we'll get to this later also too. The body is really a chemistry set, but we got to get into later. It's also a microbiology set. So those two things, I think, are probably the two most important things, when people are deciding what foods they're going to put into their body. So let's go on to something that I really wanted to hear your opinion about. As you hear, I mentioned in the opening, I like to just to set the stage, compare some of the diets, and some of them have faded from popularity, but like the Ornish diet, which I followed for several years, and I actually didn't feel so great on it. I'll share some of my things, but I went out to Dean Ornish's program. I was in my 30s, and he had just come out with his book. And I was really interested. I said, wow, I'm in my 30s. Why don't I prevent my heart disease? Like, why should I wait till I'm 60? but it had good and bad things, which I ended up realizing. And a lot of my vegetarian patients are the most difficult patients to take care of. They have health issues. And Atkins, obviously, as we know, I mean, he got everybody all excited about avoiding carbs. And that probably kind of gave rise to the keto diet. So can you set the stage for me a little bit? You talk about this as one of the chapters in your book. Let's go one by one, some simple things. You know, again, just your perspective, let's say, on the Ornish diet. What's low fat, vegetarian, you know, quickly, good and bad, you know?
Well, there's many good things about a vegetarian diet if it's a vegetarian diet. That means you're
Right.
eating lots of vegetables.
Okay.
Many people interpret a vegetarian diet as eating lots of pizza. Doesn't work that way.
Right.
So again, it's all about balance. In both cases of both Dean and Robert Atkins, there are two extremes. They're both throwing out the baby with the bathwater. The fact is that what I tried to do with the zone diet was say, you need a balance. You need enough protein. I don't care if it's vegetarian or animal protein, but it has to be balanced by the right amount of carbohydrate. And yes, keep the fat levels low. So both had points to make, but in many ways, I felt like a Goldilocks and the Three Bears.
Well, wait a second. But Atkins, as you know, he didn't really say that you had to keep the fat low, right? I mean, that was why people loved it. They were eating their hamburgers, big steaks. You know, they were getting a lot of fat, but they were, we'll get to this, they were like sort of blunting the insulin response because it wasn't, you know, from the carbs. So they would lose weight, probably, I don't know, with some water weight. It was like almost like a diuretic effect. And, you know, and really the opposite of Dean Ornish, who was like low fat. And he basically, unfortunately, set the stage for fats are all pretty much bad, right?
Exactly. And
I know, I've been through this.
People want simple solutions to very complex questions.
Right.
So it's not that there's any evil nutrient. You're looking for what is the right balance.
Right.
And the balance for what? Not to lose weight, but to control your hormonal system that basically indicates really the quality of life you're going to have.
Okay. What's your feeling about, we'll jump around here a little bit, but let's say, again, something that's really confused me, and I'm almost glad that you say this, like this keto diet, which I've never really been in favor of, but there are just, I have to mention, there are some people, prominent people, really almost like David Perlmutter, who I've met, you know, and he's very big in, you know, the brain drain and the whole thing about, he thinks that ketogenic diets are good for brain health. But what I never understood, and again, as a physician, you know, we used to always worry about when people went to ketosis. Obviously, it was diabetics, but, and again, you make the case that actually ketosis, you know, your brain needs carbs, and it needs about 130 grams, you mentioned, a day of glucose. And then, you know, these kind of diets promote going to ketosis. They're big on what we used to consider bad fats, like coconut oil. What's your perspective on that?
Well, the fact is, actually, we published some very, very careful studies in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition nearly 15 years ago, comparing the zone diet to a keto diet under highly controlled circumstances. The total calories were the same. The total amount of protein was the same. The only difference was the ratio of carbohydrate and fat.
Right.
And what did that show? It showed in every parameter we looked at that the zone diet was superior. There was only one area that the ketogenic diet was superior. It caused a doubling of inflammation in the blood within 6 weeks.
Not good.
Not good at all.
So why are they saying this is good for brain health? I mean, why would Perlmutter, you know, just what do they think that, I mean, what is their, I'm confused. Like, what's their basis for saying that? Again, it just keeps the blood sugar levels at a very low, like the hemoglobin A1C at very low levels, because they probably do, I assume.
No, that on the
they actually go up.
They actually go up. One of the reasons when you go into ketosis, the brain, each organ, you know, really uses different forms of energy. The heart can only use fat. The muscle can use both fat and carbohydrate to make ATP. Right. The brain can only use glucose. So this is what happens even on a purely starvation diet. This was work done at Harvard Medical School nearly 35 years ago. On a pure starvation diet of 35 days, no food whatsoever, what you find that the blood sugar levels never drop below about 60 milligrams per deciliter. That's low
Yeah.
blood sugar, but
It
not
is
abnormally
low.
low.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, how can you basically maintain 60 milligrams of blood sugar with no food? The answer is the hormone cortisol.
Uh-huh.
So again, that you have a mechanism called neoglucogenesis, that if you're not putting enough carbohydrates in the mouth, the body will respond by increasing cortisol to
And that's a
break
stress
down
hormone. And just
muscle.
as our listeners know, that's a stress hormone. That is not good ever to have increased in your body. That's your body is stressed. A little stress is okay. A lot of stress, not good.
And this is a lot of stress. And what it does, it breaks down your muscle mass to convert it into glucose for the brain.
Interesting. Right. What about also, let's talk about this, a couple of things. The Dr. Stephen Gundry, who I was on a podcast with several months ago before COVID, a lot of months ago, he's promoting this whole thing about avoiding lectins, and even another diet that starts to seem ever more confusing. And he also eats a very restrictive diet. I know when I was talking to him, he eats like only 2 hours a day for 6 months a year. I mean, like, I don't know how he lives like that. It's just, I mean, it's like being on a desert island or something. But what is, again, with this lectins and causing inflammation? My background's in immunology, and I know there's a lectin pathway and everything, but a lot of these foods seem like they could be healthy vegetables and stuff like that too. And again, you're just restricting more foods.
Oh, of course. And actually the Gundry approach was just a variation of Peter D'Adamo's approach many decades earlier. Eat right for your blood type.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
And so the aspect to say lectins, they can get in the body and cause all sorts of problems. That's true. That's why we have an immune system at the gut level to prevent lectins from getting into the blood and causing distress. Now, it makes a very simple aspect, again, saying it's not what you put in the diet. It's saying, why balance it? Just take things out, the magic bullet. Right. And the things that are rich in lectins are things that every nutritionist, every physician say, these are good things for the body.
Right.
Why are they somehow dangerous?
Right.
Because it makes good publicity.
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to dispel here. I mean, as I said, we will get to your diet because it has so many practical and I think sensible things for patients. And it may not be, may not make all the the front page of the newspapers again. I mean, because you've been around a long time, you know that. I mean, that is the one good thing. You've kind of outlasted a lot of other diets, but
longevity is good.
I know it is. Well, you know why it's interesting. Like we'll get to that also. Like you say that, I mean, your diet in some ways too is a little bit of a variation of the Mediterranean, or I would call the blue zone diets, which, again, are what people it seems sensible because these people who live to very long lives in these areas are basically eating these type of balanced diets. But let me ask you one thing too about the longevity diets, these whole things with the intermittent fasting and time restricted eating. Again, because you do promote a little bit in the zone.
Variation. The zone is always a day one, a calorie restricted diet. A calorie restriction is the only proven technology that can basically increase aging, increase health span. Mm-hmm. So again, the more calories we eat, the faster we age. Mm-hmm. Now, the question is, in terms of calorie restricted diet, you can't be hungry all the time. Right. And you have to have adequate levels of protein, carbohydrate, and fat. So the zone diet started out, it really is a theory is now known as protein leveraging. That the amount of calories you consume in a meal is based to a great extent on the amount of protein eaten at that one meal. Right. Because once basically hormones from the gut, mainly PYY or GPL1, reach the brain, it says stop eating. If you're not eating enough protein, you will not release those hormones from the gut, and the body will basically keep on eating until it gets enough calories to set other sensors off to say stop eating. So calorie restriction is the key. Intermittent fasting, it says, oh, it's so hard. Just eat whatever you want to for 8 hours a day, or some people 2 hours a day. Makes no sense. Our bodies are based upon homeostasis, hormonal homeostasis. Yeah. Every time we eat, we're causing massive changes in hormonal levels that we can control, or they'll control us. So when you hear about this intermittent fasting, it's really calorie restriction.
Well, how about let's say the time restricted, because it's interesting, you say in your books, I think you also say about also trying to keep the blood sugar level sort of, even keel, which makes sense. The other ones, like the time restricted, say, you know what? No, your body. I mean, I interviewed Mark Mathis from the NIH. You know, again, a lot of them believe in this whole aging thing. That by, let's say, for example, skipping breakfast. You know, we were all kind of brought up breakfast is you need to start the day, but actually by skipping it and going longer, fasting and just like start. Then let's say typically, if you ate at 7, 8 o'clock the night before, and then you don't eat again till 1 or 2 o'clock, like that 14-hour period actually helps the cells, autophagy, kind of, cleanse themselves essentially. Are you disagree with that or?
Yes, I mean, he's correct. If you basically decrease calories, you'll activate the gene transcription factor, AMPK, that does all those things.
Okay.
So we have a couple of things. We have data. There's one thing to go from mice, but let's go to humans. We know from long-term studies, 1-year studies, in terms of calorie restriction, continuous calorie restriction, that's really the zone diet, versus intermittent fasting. So the calories coming in are exactly the same. There are no differences after 1 year in weight loss or any other metabolic profiles. So a calorie is a calorie when it comes to calorie restriction. Second thing with time restricted. Well, the one way to increase inflammation in the body is eat too many calories at any one meal.
Oh, that's a really good point. That's and what would that be? What would you say that is? Let's say, we all like to sort of get a ballpark figure. Well, I mean, well, again, let's just talk total calories. Like, let's say the average man, if we're going to just call the average man, what he should be eating about 1,800 calories a day. I mean, again,
I'd say closer to 1,500. That's all you need.
1,500. Okay.
Now,
it doesn't matter how he divides it up. That shouldn't, or you eat too much at one time like that. Don't eat out of that, out of that 1,500. Don't eat 1,000 at dinner or whatever.
Exactly. You're spreading it throughout the day like a drug, and you're trying to keep the ratio of protein to carbohydrate as balanced as possible to every drug. My initial human studies were not done in overweight people; they were done with Olympic athletes. Now, Olympic athletes need more calories than you or I.
Right.
But the Olympic athletes I've worked with who have won 25 gold medals in the last 5 Olympics, none of them have ever consumed more than 2,500 calories per day.
Wow.
Not
5,000. I used to read about Michael Phelps. I think he used to consume about 7,000 calories a day. I mean, he's a huge guy. What?
But most of at least the Olympic athletes I've worked with.
No, I know. I'm just finding it. I find that interesting. And again, too, it is very interesting to me because I know some I've read stories about marathon runners and I'm always surprised also how they don't eat a lot. Believe it. You think for all of the running and everything they're doing. I mean, I know they try to stay thin because they think all the extra pounds holds back their time and injuries and all that. But fascinating, really.
So let's go back to the average man like you or I.
Yeah.
1,500 calories is about what you want. So 3 meals a day, each of about 500 calories. And here's a good rule of thumb. Don't eat after the sun goes down.
Yeah, well, if they got rid of television and we just went to sleep then it would be fine. I'm such a night eater. It's like the worst curse.
Well, because now you're basically the whole aspect of intermittent fasting. Say we're being in line with our circadian rhythms.
Yes.
Our circadian rhythms are governed by light time cycle,
absolutely.
Not our watch.
I know, absolutely.
Also,
I've read studies. This was from the Wertzmans, I think they were up at MIT. Like, we do tend to crave carbs at night. It helps us. Yeah, I don't know what it is to sleep. Like they'll say, what I mean? So if you're going to have, and other places I've heard too, that, if you're going to get your carbs, it's actually, I don't know if it's beneficial, but it's satisfying. I don't know.
Oh, it's satisfying. Carbs are always satisfying.
They sure are.
But scientifically, that's not correct. It's saying, here's a good rule of thumb. Your last meal was hormonally balanced if you're not hungry for the next 5 hours.
I'll tell you something personal for me, what I find, because again, also, it's interesting. Your body gets on such a rhythm. Like even when we've had the daylight savings, like this hour change, I just know I'm not hungry till what was my original, when I typically eat. I typically eat a late morning breakfast, something, small like blueberries, walnuts, something like that, like a basic snack. Then at lunch, I have a salad. And what's interesting, I don't know, I guess during the day and I'm working, whatever, I don't even think about food. I feel satisfied. And probably, again, the salad is balanced. But then in the evening, at the end of the day, boy, the appetite comes out. I don't know what it is, like sort of like you finish your day, you look forward to your dinner, and then the battle goes. Like he's because you're not as busy, I guess.
Well, no, I'll give you another alternative aspect. Oops. And that is,
We lose you?
there we go. And that is of, oh, see, what happened? Oh my goodness gracious.
What's the matter?
I hit the wrong button.
Okay.
The alternative aspect that each meal, the reason why you're hungry in the evening, because your two previous meals, that is the meal at breakfast and the meal at lunch, were hormonally unbalanced.
Ah, interesting.
Because and now you go back to your breakfast. You say, I had some walnuts, okay, a little fat. I had
Some
some
blueberries, yeah.
but not enough protein.
Interesting.
At lunch, you probably had enough carbohydrate and good carbohydrates.
Well,
but
mostly
not enough protein.
salad and beans. I try to do like vegetarian until my last meal, and sometimes
Well,
I do vegetarian.
but you want to say
You need the protein.
you need the protein. That
Will
goes
the
back to
beans give you the protein? Will the beans do it, or they don't do it enough? It's
They
not
don't
like
do it
having
enough because they carry a massive amount of carbohydrates at the same time.
Interesting. So you would say, okay, I see that. So if I had enough protein throughout the day, I wouldn't be as ravenously hungry in the evening.
Exactly.
That's a really good point. See, I learned, that's why I do this podcast. Now, I not only share all this great information with my listeners, I learned something for myself. Sorry, gang. But it's interesting because I fight it. It's like, I'm like, what the heck am I doing? I'm eating healthy. I feel good during the day. And then in the evening, I am ravenously hungry.
Your hormones are catching up to you.
Yeah, very interesting. Okay, we're going to get into specific on the zones, but I want to move to diet and inflammation, which is obviously the thing that you brought out. And obviously, now it's also it's something most of the public, I see with most of my patients, they are very aware of it now. They really have shifted from losing a few pounds or whatever to saying I don't want my body inflamed. You make some really interesting assertions in your books that again. Following the zone diet can help with autoimmune disease, colitis, arthritis, and again with supplementation, which we'll get into. But I want to ask you, how do you describe gut inflammation, and how do you test for it? And I asked Alessio Pisano, at Harvard.
Yes.
I had him on, and he's really done some amazing work, showing the zonulin levels. What do you look for? Because you do talk about it in the book about the gut being inflamed and.
Well, when the gut's inflamed, what happens is basically the barrier between the world of microbes, which is a very alien world compared to our world, breaks down. And now those microbial fragments can begin to enter into the blood and basically cause now sentinels on every cell. They're called toll-like receptors to be lit up. And they basically generate inflammation. This is what happens when you have sepsis. The barriers break down, you develop sepsis, you get a cytokine storm, and you usually die. Now, a gut is not a gut inflammation is not as bad as sepsis, but sepsis shows exactly the same things which are happening. You want a strong gut barrier to keep microbial fragments on their side in their world. When they reach our world, bad things happen.
So how do you see achieving that? And just out of curiosity too, because I don't remember seeing the book, because I know we'll get into how you talk about arachidonic acid and essential fatty acid ratios, but does any of that help let's say, again, how people are, again, on your diet, the zone diets and the resolution zone diet, how do they keep their gut healthy if maybe up till now it was not healthy?
Well, here's a good rule of thumb. Your great-grandmother told you, eat 10 servings of fruits and vegetables per day.
Okay.
Why? Because they contain the fermentable fiber the gut needs to generate the energy to maintain itself and to prevent the breakdown of the gut barrier.
Okay. That's a good, remember what grandma said. Okay, let's get into your 3 steps that you mentioned in your book in the resolution zone that reverse inflammation. I'd like you just to go over a little bit specifics on the diet. You talk about the omega-3s, polyphenols, and the fermentable fibers. So tell the listeners a little bit more in depth, if you wouldn't mind, so they could really understand the ratios, and how they can practically do it, Dr. Sears. I know it's really interesting, actually. Once too, I can't believe I remember this. Years ago, a colleague of mine, a doctor, was following your diet and with his daughter, and he was actually getting the meals, I guess the zone meals. Do you still do that?
No, no.
Oh, he used to get the zone meals. They would get delivered, and he was like so happy,
Yeah.
But explain to the listeners a little bit again now about the zone diet again, which you, as I said, been working on for 3 decades at least. Let's get the the ins and outs a little bit, and any as specific or anything that's practical would be welcome to the listeners.
Let's start with the practical. That's always the best.
Yes, yeah.
Here's a good rule. All you need to follow the zone diet are 3 things: 1 hand, 1 eye, and 1 watch. If you have those 3 things, you can follow this for a lifetime.
Okay.
Now, here's how you use those rules. At each meal, you put some low-fat protein on your plate. I don't care what the source is, whether it's vegetarian, animal protein, but just low-fat protein. But how much? No more than the size of the palm of your hand.
A deck of cards kind of thing, like they say. Yeah.
And so that's about 25 grams on average, about 22 grams for a female, 28 grams for a male.
Well, can I stop you one second? What would be the vegetarian choice? Because like a fish, obviously people know. Chicken. What would be? You said beans are too carbohydrate heavy. So what would be
you have to find now soybean substitutes. You see Impossible meat, things like this. Which are more heavily enriched now in basically plant protein.
Okay.
So that now why do you need that's why the hand. Now why the eye? You have to divide your plate into 3 equal sections. So on 1/3 of the plate, you put that amount of protein you're going to eat at that meal on the plate. The other 2/3 of the plate, you fill it until it's overflowing with non-starchy vegetables and maybe a little fruit.
Okay.
And then
what about a grain? What about grain? Like, let's say, what about some grains? If people want quinoa or rice or something like that.
I'll paraphrase Dirty Harry. Do you feel lucky? Because again, the greatest repository of nutrients are found in fruits and vegetables, not grains. And they're an incredibly rich source of glucose that enters the bloodstream very rapidly.
Right. So, they're high glycemic index, which people are familiar. So you're very much also concerned about glycemic index with your foods. Yes. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
And then you have a dash of fat. And then why do you need the watch? If you balance your meal correctly for the next 5 hours, you won't be hungry.
Those are great tips and great points. So let me ask you a question. So if I'm going to give my own practical things. So if I'm going for, I also don't like to eat heavy during the day. I'm busy and, it's like I can't, I'm not sitting down to a big meal at lunchtime. I might break between patients. If I have a salad, and I like also, there was a book once called The Color Code, which basically emphasizes, and you basically mentioned this too, is like if you have a plate that's got all the different colors on it, you're getting all the different polyphenols and things from plant substances. But what would you recommend? Let's say if I'm having tomatoes, lettuce, avocado, beans, maybe some little chicken or something too. You shaking your head, is that good, bad? I mean,
well, it depends how how much little chicken is. If the chicken is the size of the palm of your hand, it's perfect.
So that is good, right? Okay, so that's the kind of thing that I want to try that again. I kind of moved. I was thinking like going again slightly more vegetarian based, but as I said, I was finding myself very hungry later and overeating. And so again, I think what you really point out, which is so important. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong too. That so basically in your diets, I think you like 40% carbs, and again, this 30% fat, 30% protein. Is that correct?
That's correct. But again, let's put it in terms of practical aspects.
Yeah, let's do it practical, right? Because people aren't sitting there measuring percentages.
So I use the 1, 2, 3 method.
Okay.
For every gram of fat you have at a meal, have 2 grams of protein and 3 grams of carbohydrate.
Okay.
You get about the same percentage of calories.
That's a good point. I think also it's something too that you brought up, which I maybe conveniently, forgot about. It was like, let's say also again, when I'll have like lunch, a lot of times you go to these salad places, they'll give you a full avocado. That's a lot of fat. Right.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Instead of like you say, have slithers of it or a little, a quarter of that, and again, you're like, oh, it's not as satisfying, but you learn to get used to it because like, as we all know, if it's all on our plate, we tend to demolish the plate. It's gone. And that's where the discipline has to come in portion size. I mean, I once went 2 years ago with my wife to Canyon Ranch. And I'll never forget, we went there because we figured, oh, it's a nice, it was up in the Berkshires, and we knew we'd be eating healthy because we liked eating healthy food. But I'll never forget, like when the meals came around, the portion seemed so small, you know, and I'm not an enormous eater, but I'm like, this is really small, you know, but we're just so used to, you know, going to the restaurants or wherever we go that everything is overflowing.
But see, at the Canyon Ranch, they're giving you lots of grains. Grains are very calorically dense. So to restrict calories, you have to have very small amounts. Now, if they'd taken the grains off the plate and replaced it with non-starchy vegetables, you'd say, no mas, too much. It's hard, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to eat a lot of non-starchy vegetables.
When you say non-starchy vegetables too, you're talking, well, when you're taking starchy vegetables, you're talking about potatoes. Are you also talking about sweet potatoes pretty much?
Yes,
Also?
so I talk about the ABCs.
Yes, okay, let's hear that.
Asparagus, artichokes, broccoli, cauliflower, and spinach. They're ABCs.
Okay. Okay. How about if people have a little bit of grain with their meals? Is that okay?
A little grain is fine. Yes.
Okay, it's like a little topping. All right.
A dessert.
Okay, let's get to one of your really big things, and it was one of the books I love that you wrote, The Omega Zone. Believe it or not, I read a lot of your stuff. Let's talk about the omega fatty acids in the diet. Let's talk practical, and then we're going to go a little bit deeper into because I know you're a big proponent of fish oil, and I really want to hash that out a little bit. So tell again the listeners about the omega-3s, like, you know, how they can get it through, you know, the nuts, fish, you know, olive oil, etc.
Well, again, now we get a little complexity in the weeds, but it's not the omega-3s per se. It's the really elongated omega-3s. That is the EPA and the DHA. You're not going to find them in nuts.
You won't find them in nuts.
Not at all. And though nuts contain omega-3 fatty acids, their transformation into EPA and DHA is incredibly slow and inefficient. So we have a lot of confusion as to, yes, there's, you know, okay omega-3s and then the big boys. So you want to have enough of the big boys. How much?
Wait, let's talk about this. So for the little boys, the nuts. So let's say when people eat walnuts and stuff too, that's like okay healthy. It's not super healthy.
It's okay healthy because it's a great source of fermentable fiber.
Okay.
Polyphenols, but the amount of omega-3 fatty acids to have any effect on inflammation is basically zilch.
Wow. Okay.
Now, your great-grandmother knew exactly how much you probably needed. That is, 3 generations ago, no child could leave the house unless they had a tablespoon of cod liver oil.
Yes.
World's most disgusting food.
Ugh, yes.
Now, cod liver oil contains about 2.5 grams of omega-3 fatty acids of EPA and DHA.
Yeah.
The average American today consumes 125 milligrams. Why is this a difference important? Because without adequate levels of these long-chain omega-3 fatty acids in the blood, you cannot make a newly discovered group of hormones called resolvins that resolve inflammation. So
what about societies that didn't live near the ocean? They couldn't fish. You know, I mean, how did they? You know, or
well, it turns out the vast majority of societies who live near the ocean usually live near lakes.
Okay, so they got fish somehow.
Exactly,
okay.
And you see this basically in the East African Rift Valley. Those tribes now still live on the shoreline, consume massive amounts of EPA and DHA compared to their farming brethren, maybe only 20 miles away.
Okay, so so the key is fish.
Well, no, the key is these omega-3 fatty acids.
Well,
fish
how do you get them?
Problems.
Oh, okay.
They're called contamination. You can run, but you can't hide.
Right.
And the biggest contaminant is called polychlorinated biphenyls. They're found in every fish in the world today because they are persistent. They're basically indestructible. But we now know they're neurotoxins, carcinogens, and endocrine disruptors.
Right.
So just eating fish, that plus basically contamination of mercury. So we have some problems.
We do, right? You know, yeah.
So the answer becomes now refined fish oil that you've taken out the pollutants that we have put into the environment.
So let me ask you this too, because there are some other holistic doctors around the country who I really respect. And I was at a meeting once about 3 years ago, and he stopped recommending fish oil for his patients. He just felt the way they even make the fish oil, it's impossible to prevent contamination.
Wrong.
Okay.
And I say because all fish oil, pharmaceutical drugs, the cheapest stuff you can find at a health
Like a
food store,
drugstore,
they
yeah.
all come from the same source: anchovies and sardines caught off the coast of Peru and Chile.
Okay.
Now, what differentiates the good from the bad is the degree of refining. That you can remove the mercury, that's easy.
Okay.
Removing the PCBs, that's hard work.
Okay. And
So
I,
you can
'cause I know
use
for a
more
while too,
cautious.
I know for a while too, you made a supplement through your company or something, um, that was selling the fish oils again.
We still do. As I pointed out in my book, the Omega RX Zone, nearly 20 years ago,
Yeah.
it's a major problem. And frankly, I think we're the only company who's actually made a commitment to reduce the levels of PCBs. Our levels that we measure on every batch are 2 orders of magnitude lower than prescription drugs, 3
Hmm.
orders of magnitude lower than what you find in a health food store. Is it expensive? Yeah. Is it
Yeah.
worth it? Yeah.
Let me ask you this though too, because I've followed the literature over the years, where, again, for a while, the omega-3 fatty acid supplementation, there was Alexander Leaf, I think at Harvard,
Yes.
big promoter of that. It was actually Dean Ornish's mentor at Harvard. He was the one who basically initiated the whole thing that, these omega-3 fatty acids are super important in preventing atherosclerosis. Then over really decades, I mean, more of the papers that came out found no benefit, from them. And honestly, you're one of the few that says you really don't even talk about the heart as much as you talk about being so important, in autoimmune diseases. So do you still stick by that?
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
See, if you give a placebo dose, you get placebo effects.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the right dose of fish oil? It depends. It depends on where the inflammation is located and how much you have.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you're well and you look good in the swimsuit. Then the 2.5 grams a day is probably enough. Now, what if you're not well? You're obese. You have heart disease, diabetes. Probably need double that amount.
About 5
And
grams.
what if you have now of neurological problems or immune problems, even higher levels still? So how are you going to know? Well, actually, the blood will tell you. So you can titrate the blood to a certain level of arachidonic acid, the building block of making all of the pro-inflammatory hormones, and EPA, the building block of making the pro-resolving hormones, to get the right balance. You need them both,
Yeah.
but they have to be in balance.
Yeah. That what I found so interesting in your book, that Omega Zone book, that so few doctors look at stuff like that. And one of the things which I learned from you also, I've passed this along to hundreds of patients, is that I have sometimes the patients come in and they have a high cholesterol, especially women, but their HDL is high, it's good. Their triglycerides are low, and you point out in your book, when you have like a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio, that's quite good. So these people who normally some doctor might put them on a statin should not be on a statin. It's just going to probably lower their good HDL.
Not only lower their HDL, but more importantly, increase their likelihood for developing diabetes.
From what, the statin?
Exactly.
Why? Why does that
Because
happen?
again, the statin, this is one of the problems of, let's say, of reductionist thinking. I see the problem. It's basically HMG CoA reductase. I'll inhibit it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, be careful what you wish for. That's why the best way is, and the best way to lower the cholesterol turns out to be inhibiting that enzyme. The best way we can inhibit it, reduce the levels of insulin in the bloodstream.
Mm-hmm.
We're not statin deficient. We're making too much insulin because of insulin resistance.
Right. Okay. Let's go on to about polyphenols. You mentioned in the book also, again, I think one of the other really important things in reversing inflammation. So things like blueberries, olive oil, cocoa, well, red wine, even though you say some societies do better without any wine at all, resveratrol, green tea, all important things in the diet.
They are important things, but not equally important.
Okay.
There are about 8,000 known polyphenols.
Okay.
But most of the polyphenols are totally water insoluble. Now, if you had a drug that was totally water insoluble and you gave it orally, would it have any efficaciousness?
No.
No, it wouldn't get in the bloodstream. Say, Yeah, the same is true of polyphenols. Not all polyphenols have a sufficient water solubility to get into the blood to activate that last major phase, the activation of AMPK, the enzyme of life. Now, the polyphenols that have the highest levels of these more water-soluble polyphenols are those from fruits and berries.
Mm-hmm. So
And,
those are good
and
as long as you can get the kind that don't have pesticides and all that.
exactly.
So, mm-hmm.
Blueberries fall in that category.
Yeah. And what about blackberries? Are supposed to be good too?
They're good also.
Yeah.
But
Raspberries.
all these are good, except they carry massive amounts of glucose. Now, why is that important? Well, remember, we're trying to basically activate AMPK.
Right.
But if we take in too much glucose, that inhibits AMPK. So now looking at polyphenol extracts become a way of getting now the polyphenols without the extra glucose.
So what's a polyphenol extract?
Well, again, where you basically have, here's a one polyphenol extract. It's called red wine.
Oh.
So, but we think, red wine, resveratrol. There's virtually very small amounts of resveratrol there. It's not red, it's not blue, it's white, it's water insoluble. It's only one of many 50 polyphenols in red wine. So the major polyphenol in red wine that gives it the color comes from that group of polyphenols that you find in fruits and berries.
What about cocoa? I like cocoa.
Cocoa is great, except for one thing.
The cadmium.
Well, yeah, that's two things.
Okay.
So yeah, the higher the amount of cocoa polyphenols, the higher the amount of cadmium. This is not good. Second of all, only about 10% of the cocoa polyphenols can enter the blood, which means 90% can't.
Oh.
Now, the 90% that can't are good for the gut, but they aren't very good for you. So again, you're looking for those 8,000 polyphenols that have the highest degree of water solubility.
And what are those? Like, what are the examples of that?
Well, the best group is called delphinidines. Delphinidines are found in the highest concentrations in the blueberry family.
Okay.
The American blueberry, the Patagonian blueberry, and the Russian blueberry. These have very high levels of these delphinidines.
Right. Okay. And what about green tea? Do you think you get enough of the benefits? Do people always say for the prostate it's good, and I don't know, other, the arteries and stuff like that too. Do you buy into that?
Oh, well, I buy into it with a grain of salt. Now, I drink about maybe 8 to 10 cups of green tea per day.
Wow. How come so much?
Because it's good for you. But
so you do think it's good for? Well, why is it good for you?
Because it contains polyphenols.
Oh, that's what I said.
But the fact is, they are not nearly as effective as the other polyphenols found from fruits and vegetables. So they're good. So the more polyphenols you get in the diet, the better off you are.
All right. And what about, because I always say this to my patients too, I said, the biblical diet was probably the best. If it was around the biblical times, you should eat it. So olive oil, which they use for a lot of different things. You're a big fan of cooking with it, just pouring it on,
I'm a
on
big
vegetables.
I'm a big fan of cooking with refined olive oil because the cooking will destroy the polyphenols. Now, after you cooked it, now you add the extra virgin olive oil, which contains the polyphenols.
Right. Wait. So you cook with the refined olive oil?
Yes.
Because it just gets burnt off. Doesn't matter. You don't need the extra virgin.
You're going to break down products of the polyphenols,
Yeah.
and you're not getting any excess omega-6 fatty acids in the process.
Right. Well, that's another thing too. You mentioned this in the book. I think it's so important. Again, people aren't going to be able to measure this, but you say we're supposed to have, more omega-6 than omega-3, but we get way too much. The ratio is out of proportion. And what is high in omega-6 again? Like, is it, I forgot, is it soy or is it legumes?
All vegetable oils are incredibly high. So that this was not a problem at the turn of the century at 1900. We had no vegetable oils. It's only when we basically developed gasoline that we could extract out the vegetable oils from seeds that became now one of the primary sources of calories and the second most inexpensive source of calories, just barely after table sugar.
So what's the best thing to cook with? Is it best, let's say, you're better off with, like people just always think you're better off cooking with olive oil versus butter, versus, what's the best thing to cook
Well, that's
for?
why I go back to say, get the cheapest olive oil you can in the store and cook with that.
Because that's fine.
And that's good for the cooking. It's low in omega-6 fatty
And
acids.
things won't stick, whatever, right? Yeah.
And then add the extra virgin expensive
Got
stuff
it.
to get the polyphenols.
What about avocado oil? Do you think that's also good for cooking with, or?
It has a lot of carotenoids that can break down. So again, and expensive. So get the cheap refined olive oil for cooking, and then add the good things after the fact.
Okay. What about also now we talked about, which I think is very important, what you say, is fermentable fiber. I always like to tell my patients when I'm having them have ground up flax seeds, which I tell them to put in their diet and stuff like that too. I said, I call it the good carpeting for the gut. Is that how you see it? Do you see it as, something that essentially is good for the good bacteria that we want to promote in our intestinal tract?
It's incredibly important, because if you don't feed this fermentable fiber, and flax seeds are very good in this, if you don't feed the bacteria, they're going to get angry.
Yeah.
And what they do, they start digesting the barrier between their world and our world. That's called a dysfunctional gut.
Right.
So you have to have a lot of fiber in the diet to keep the microbes happy.
Right.
So you're happy.
Well, because what happens also, and I've seen, probably the biggest thing I see in my practice is what's called Candida yeast overgrowth, which again, so many doctors did not recognize, but I see cases every week, and I do now consults all over the country on this. And it's all because, sadly, when people were put on massive doses of antibiotics, whether it was for acne, the teenagers, the adults, sometimes if they've had chronic sinus, not realizing that most of these infections are not even bacterial, so it's like an epidemic, and it definitely has changed the microbiome. So my job is essentially trying to work with them on their diet to get that fermentable fiber back, to sort of restore that good balance. Because I think that was one of the main things I wanted to get to today. I mean, as I said early in the introduction, you early on in your career obviously focused on this idea of inflammation and definitely approached it as a biochemistry issue, which, again, was the main thinking back then. But now the microbiome has become just as important. And I think it's really the marriage of these two concepts are how people are going to stay healthy. Is that
I agree.
sense?
It's really, again, systems biology. It's not any one magical drug or one magical nutrient.
Right.
It's this how the system works, how to make the system be as efficient as possible, that basically everything is basically maintained in a zone.
Yeah. Tell us about, can you explain a little bit more about insulin resistance and what our listeners should know, and if they have to ask their doctor? Because, again, a lot of times doctors get very still basic blood studies, and this isn't addressed. And I know you mentioned in your book about looking at hemoglobin A1C, glucose over 100. Does it matter also the serum insulin, whether it's high or low? I mean, what are the factors?
It's incredibly important.
Okay.
The best marker of insulin resistance is called HOMA, which is a ratio from looking at the ratio of fasting glucose to fasting insulin. Ideally, your fasting insulin should be less than 5 microunits per ml. The average in America is about 20. Now,
a fasting insulin.
Exactly. It's not a standard test. That's why you'll see it.
Yeah, I want to ask this because you're really good with these ratio things. So you're saying a really good test is, let's say I send a patient and I say to them, okay, you got to go for bloods. It's going to be first thing in the morning, whatever. You do it overnight fast. You look at their blood sugar, and again, the labs of course give you ranges. They say 80 to 99. But if a person's 99, whatever, and their insulin is 15, those are bad numbers, right? I mean, those
bad. Yes, I'll put the emphasis on bad.
Yeah. And would you say that also indicates, are they pre-diabetic or they have insulin resistance? I mean, how do you?
They are both.
Both.
About 16% of people who have severe insulin resistance are normal weight. But the insulin resistance is severe. Now, why is this important? Insulin is not the boogeyman. It's incredibly important as a central control point to control our metabolism.
Okay.
But when you have inflammation, whether it be the muscle cells or the liver cells or the adipose tissue, now insulin can't get its job done. That's what we call insulin resistance. Now the poor pancreas keeps on pumping out more and more insulin to basically deliver the message you're supposed to do something. Now this excess insulin has, as with many hormones, anytime you have excessive hormones, you get collateral damage. That's the collateral damage that comes from excess insulin.
Interesting. Glycemic index. because now just because we're talking about this, and you know, I mean, look, there are healthy foods. I mean, like today, for example, like I had a half a banana. I like bananas, but are they too high in the glycemic index? I mean, do people have to be very careful with, I mean, fruits because of that? I mean, I also find apples are really good for the fiber. They keep people full. You know, how do you, well, you know, like, because you just said earlier about grandma's advice about the 8 to 10 fruits and vegetables. How do you do that so that you're not getting the glycemic index off the scale?
Well, first of all, I should paraphrase the 10 servings being 8 servings of vegetables and 2 of fruit.
Oh, you didn't say that before. Okay.
That's called details.
All right.
And so it's looking at the dose. It depends on the individual. If they have insulin resistance, they're pre-diabetic, they're obese, they're even overweight.
Yeah.
They say you want to basically be very careful about putting in too much carbohydrates. Now, if you're a world-class athlete, you have a little more leeway. Not that much more leeway.
Just a little leeway for the world-class athlete.
Exactly. You know, they are no different than you and I.
Yeah.
After 2 hours after their training. So
well, what did they do? What did they do to like replenish? Let's say that, you know, I watched the tennis. I was a tennis player. I played in college and high school, and you know, and I watched the pros, and they have a 5-hour match, and then maybe 2 days later they got to play another 3-hour match. But what do they do when they're finished? You know, I mean, they have to be depleted. I mean, obviously they have to be hydrated. I mean, what would be a perfect meal post? And even for the weekend warrior like myself, what would be the perfect? You know, I rode my bike today for 10 miles or something, whatever. You know, what would be the perfect, you know, reward, you know, meal, you know, to replenish yourself and, you know, feel satisfied. You know, as far as, is that when you get a little more carbs?
No.
No.
That's called a zone meal.
Mm.
So
Same
again,
so no treat for running 10 miles or whatever.
the only treat is that because you're running 10 miles, you're causing more muscle damage. You might need a little more protein than if you weren't running the 10 miles. More protein means I need more carbohydrate and a little more fat.
To balance it. Okay.
And so the only difference between a world-class athlete and a diabetic patient following the zone diet is that the world-class athlete will need more protein, more carbohydrate, and possibly more fat. Now, how do you know if you need more fat in your diet? Take your shirt off and look at yourself in the mirror. If you can see, you know, a 6-pack, you probably need some more carbohydrate because you need some more fat. So you have a 2-pack. World-class swimmers operate best at about 10% body fat.
Wow.
6% body fat, you look great on Fitness Magazine, but say you're not going to be a very good performer.
Yeah.
So the secret is to exercise hard, replenish within a 2-hour window after that exercise period.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Yeah, I don't have the 6-pack, so I assume I have to watch my shakes after my workouts.
Exactly.
I knew this was going to be a tough day today. Okay. Just one other question though about protein. You know, David Sinclair, who's at Harvard, and you probably heard of him. He's considered a big anti-aging expert. He says protein ages us. He says there's been too much hype about protein. But is he talking about, you know, all these people that are putting in protein into, again, their shakes and thinking, oh, I got to eat more protein? I mean, you know, do you agree with that?
Yes and no. I mean, you're looking for the right amount of protein for you.
Okay.
That depends on your amount of lean body mass. David is not a very, let's say, big person. He doesn't need very much protein. And if you're an MIT researcher, you're not all that active. So, so again, the amount of protein need is dependent upon your muscle mass and your level of activity.
Well, I mean, just, you know, it does seem also too, you know, there was that craze. I mean, I hear from so many people, like, they're like, oh, I need more protein, or, you know, even people who are working out, they think protein makes their muscles big, you know, which, you know, really doesn't.
No, it's all about basically, you know, balance and moderation. Most people basically, there's 2 words people hate to hear: balance and moderation.
Yeah. No,
So again, it's not protein makes you age faster. It's excess calories that make you age faster.
Yeah.
Calorie restriction is, you know, basically calorie restriction without malnutrition. That means without protein malnutrition. So you have to basically develop a dietary system that makes sure you get adequate protein, but spread throughout the day at equal levels, balanced at each meal with the right glycemic load.
Yes.
with the right balance of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids
Yeah.
with a lot of fiber. You
Right.
say, oh my God, this is so hard. It's not that hard. But basically, to speak of looking at any magic aspect of saying it's living in a fool's paradise.
I get it. You know, George Sheehan, the famous cardiologist who was part of the running craze. I read a lot of his books, which I find really interesting. I wish I could have interviewed him. He always says too, people, you know, when they see as they get older, like they say, "Oh, my face looks fuller," or they look healthy, but they really should look how their weight shouldn't be that much off from their high school weight. Do you agree with that?
I agree 100%.
You do?
Those old Metropolitan Life tables from 1985,
Yeah, those are way off, right?
no, they're
They're
actually
not?
pretty much on target.
Are they really? Well, sometimes if you're too thin, they were like that. I guess because I think for infectious diseases, they were worried if you were on the
Yes.
thin end.
So that's when you have malnutrition.
But yeah, but again, if somebody was to say, you know, I mean, again, I mean, our bodies are so different, you know. I mean, today there's another whole story. I mean, you know, they poison the food, so many young people are overweight. But I mean, again, I'll give you honest. Like when I was in high school, I remember this. I was a tennis player. I was 125 pounds. You know, if I was having a, you know, holding on my weight there, you know, and I am definitely a lot heavier than that now. And then through most of my mid-life, I was in my 150s, and now, you know, I'm struggling. It's like, you know, in the high 160s, you know, 170s. But so again, could I get down to 125? I think I would, you know, I was like that when I was on the Dean Ornish diet.
Yeah, you could be.
People thought I was sickly. I mean, it was scary.
Well, you were. Yes, you can get down by starvation, but that's not the goal.
Right.
What happens as we age, our weight might not change, but our body composition changes dramatically.
Right.
Basically,
The muscle mass and all that.
we
Right.
lose muscle mass. So it's really not how much I weigh, it's what is my percent body fat. Here's a good rule of thumb. For a healthy male, there should be about 15% body fat. Now, how do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Stand stark naked in front of a mirror, and you have no love handles.
Yeah.
Now, for the average female who's healthy, should be about 22% body fat.
Mm-hmm.
How can you tell? Stand stark naked in front of a mirror, you have no cellulite. You say,
You gotta be very brave to do this.
yeah, that's why you do it in your own home with no one else looking.
Well, yeah, Jack LaLanne used to say this too. He was, you know, so funny. He was really a genius in his own way. I read some of his books too. They were really terrific. I want to ask you about supplements before we get to finish here, because this has been really great. But now I find it interesting too. You're not a big proponent on probiotics. Like you said, you could take them, but you put in your book they're a 2 out of 10 in importance compared to fermentable fiber. Why are probiotics? Is it just when we don't really know what we're doing yet with them? I always tell patients, because people always ask me, what's the best probiotic that I should have? And I tell them honestly, you know, I don't think medical science knows yet. You know, we don't really have an answer.
Well, again, they do have some benefits. That's why I give them at least a 2.
Yeah.
But the fact is that it's the prebiotics, the polyphenols and the fermentable fiber that do all the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
So again, probiotics do not colonize the gut. They pass through, they're used as target practice by our immune system. They won't hurt us because most probiotics are found in fermentable foods.
Right.
But they're not to help us other than say getting the immune system fired up. So when a real pathogen comes in there, the immune system's ready for action. That's why when you're at peace, you go in the firing range and practice your shooting skills.
Got it. Interesting. So if I was to spend a day with you, what is your typical breakfast, lunch, and dinner? I'm just curious.
Okay, well, a typical breakfast. Now I'm 6'5", so I'm
Oh wow,
a little taller than most.
Okay.
So I will have maybe a 8 egg white omelet. I say, well, that's a lot.
Would you say 8 eggs? 8 egg white omelet?
Yes,
Okay.
that's equivalent protein of a 4-ounce piece of chicken breast.
Okay. Do you
Now,
put
with
cheese
that-
in it all or no? You eat it plain. You eat straight.
Oh, I'll put some guacamole on top.
Guacamole. Okay.
And well, I'm not done yet.
I know.
And I'll have some slow cooked oatmeal for breakfast. Now for lunch,
And what do you have? Tea or coffee for? What do you have for drinking?
I'll have some green tea.
Green tea. Okay.
Now for lunch, I might have a salad with a lot of vegetables, a lot of non-starchy vegetables, and maybe 4 ounces of a piece of low-fat chicken. And I'll add some extra virgin olive oil to it.
By the way, I'm sorry, how much do you weigh, if you don't mind me asking?
Oh, I weigh about 205. This is what I weighed. Actually, it's about 3 pounds less than when I played at the National Volleyball Championships 50 years ago.
Wow. Oh, you weigh less than you did back then?
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, it doesn't say I have less body fat.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I weigh less than I did then. But I also weigh about 20 pounds less than when I played college basketball.
Wow. Wow. And dinner, what would dinner be? Some kind of fish or meat with veggies?
Dinner might be about 6 ounces of fish. Salmon would be a good choice.
Mm-hmm.
Another massive amount of non-starchy vegetables with a little olive oil, and maybe a little fruit for dessert.
Do you find, did you have to become disciplined to do this? Like, obviously, to make this a way of life? I mean, because as you know, in America, we're used to eating portion sizes way over what, these typical 4 to 6 ounces of meat. It looks minuscule to most people. You know what I'm saying? It looks like a hors d'oeuvre, not the main course. So
it's easy to become disciplined if you're based on knowledge. If you have
true.
no knowledge, then basically it's which way is the wind blowing.
Yeah.
When I go to Europe, my diet there is very, very simple. For lunch, I'll have for antipasta, or basically an appetizer, I'll have grilled vegetables. For my entree, I'll have grilled fish and more grilled vegetables.
Mm-hmm.
For my dessert, I'll have some fresh fruit.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing for dinner.
Mm-hmm.
So again, in Europe, following, to quote, the true Mediterranean aspect, is saying it's easy.
Mm. So you also stay away from a lot of the breads, right? I mean, that's just something.
It's not that they don't taste great; they do.
Yeah, I know it's hard. Everybody has their look. I tell my patients also too. Look, we all have our moments. So how do you feel? Just again with this whole zone idea, that let's say somebody says to you, "Look, I'm going to be good 6 days a week. I want my cheat day." How do you feel about
That's fine.
You think that's okay?
Well, it's okay. Saying, but it's like taking 6 steps forward
and one step
and
back.
1 step back. Okay, you're +5 for the week.
Yeah.
Okay, that's better than -2. But
right.
Saying you make the choices.
I always tell patients the only problem is though that sometimes that 6 forward and 1 step backward starts to become 4 steps forward, 2 steps backward. Right? It becomes a reverse dance. Yeah. It's tricky. So, well, Dr. Sears, this has been amazing. I don't know if you remember, we spoke a few years ago. I had the pleasure to get to talk to you just briefly, and this was such a great in-depth thing. I think all of your zone books are so interesting. As I said, I love the Omega Zone. I think this whole new book, The Resolution Zone, is also terrific. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we kind of conclude? Is there something that
I think we're really at the cusp of medicine in the 21st century. We've run out of steam of looking for magic pills. So what's our future? Well, we have to now look into the body. And we have the tools, the diet, if we're willing to basically have the discipline to basically affect everything that's important to us. Our neurological prowess, our immune system, our aging. Right now, we're faced with our biggest epidemic ever of COVID-19.
Yes.
And so do we have a drug for COVID-19? No, because the immune system is too complex. But ultimately, the immune system is orchestrated by the resolution response inside your body, inside your genes. And to unlock that, to make sure it's not blocked, we have the ultimate drug known to mankind, food. This is not a new concept. It goes back to Hippocrates, let food be your medicine, let medicine be your food. And even updated by Linus Pauling. When he announced the basic formats of orthomolecular medicine, he said, the right dose at the right time. So again, we're seeing this thing, what do we see? Accumulated knowledge. We're just giving it a little more nuance, and now saying the blood will allow you to personalize your diet. You can be a vegan, you can be a paleo advocate, you can be a lacto-vegetarian, you can be an omnivore. Doesn't matter what your dietary philosophy, you can follow the zone program within the confines of your philosophy to retake control of your body, and the blood will tell you how well you're doing.
Yeah, I thought that was a great point. That's what, again, I always enjoyed with your books. So, Dr. Barry Sears, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was illuminating to me, and I'm sure to so many of the listeners. And I hope they get to read your book, The Resolution Zone, and any of your other works. I think it's really, really important.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a lot of fun.
Okay, my pleasure. Okay, take care.